Strong as a spell, I'll never tell. Yeah, I like you, that's for sure.
Hi guys, welcome back to Exmo Lex. Years ago, when I first started making videos about leaving the Mormon church, I made a video where I talked about my experience in the Mormon temple. This was back when I was filming videos in my car, taking videos on my phone, and editing them on my phone. I can't remember exactly when I made this video, but I know that it had to be one of my first ones. And even apart from the fact that I would say that as far as, technology goes, my videos are higher quality now, I also feel like the style in which I approach these sort of things has changed. Just like anything else, the more you practice, the better you get at it. So I've decided that I would once again like to share my experience in the Mormon temple, now that I have a few years of YouTube under my belt, and I feel like I'm a little bit better at approaching subjects like this. So I'm going to talk about my experience as a young person going to the temple, as young as 12 years old, and my experience doing the sorts of ceremonies that you're allowed to do at that age, as well as the ceremonies that you do as an adult. The way I felt going through and doing my endowment ceremony for the first time, and the way I felt about it in subsequent trips. And I also want to talk about the process of being able to go into the temple recommend questions, the interview, those sorts of things. The first step for any Mormon wanting to go to the temple is for them to get a temple recommend. This is a little slip of paper given to you by your bishop or the head of your congregation that basically says you are worthy to enter the temple. So you have to be a member of the church, you have to be actively participating, and you have to be able to answer all of the temple recommend interview questions and basically pass the interview in order to get a temple recommend. I changed the questions a little bit over the years, but I'm going to read you what the questions are right now so you can get an idea of what you have to do and say in order to be able to get a temple recommend. Do you have faith in and a testimony of God, the Eternal Father, His Son, Jesus Christ, and the Holy Ghost? Do you have a testimony of the atonement of Jesus Christ and of his role as your Savior and Redeemer? Do you have a testimony of the restoration of the gospel of Jesus Christ? Do you sustain the president of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints as the prophet, seer, and revelator, and as the only person on earth authorized to exercise all priesthood keys? Do you sustain the members of the First Presidency and the Quorum of the 12 Apostles as prophets, seers, and revelators? Do you sustain the other general authorities and local leaders of the church? That question in particular, I honestly feel like is kind of a difficult one because you have to be ready to accept and sustain all of these leaders as called of God. And I would say that the leadership varies just as much as any other group of people. Like, personally, I don't believe in the church, but there are certain apostles that I think are better people than others. And certainly within local leadership, there are great bishops that, are nice people, good people, and then there are really terrible bishops, like my own personal bishop who is now in prison. So I feel like at the time, the gravity of this question didn't really hit me, but reading through it right now, I'm like, if I was to get rebaptized and rejoin the church and I wanted to get a temple recommend, even if I believed the church was true, this would be a hard question for me to answer yes to personally. The Lord has said that all things are to be done in cleanliness before him. Do you strive for moral cleanliness in your thoughts and behavior? Do you obey the law of chastity? Keeping the law of chastity includes the only sexual contact you are having at all is between a married man and woman. Anything else outside of that would be breaking the law of chastity. Anything that you do with your own body on your own would be breaking the law of chastity. Anything you do outside of a marriage sexually would be breaking the law of chastity. And like it says, do you strive for moral cleanliness in your thoughts and behavior? So even your thoughts can be considered unclean. Given that it's such a wide range of things that you are not allowed to do or think, I would say that a lot of people lie when they answer this question. Do you follow the teachings of the Church of Jesus Christ in your private and public behavior with members of your family and others? Do you support or promote any teachings, practices, or doctrine contrary to those of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints? There's been a lot of discussion about what this question means and how many things are included, because people who are more progressive members of the church typically support their LGBTQ plus friends and family members. And there are some people who are more orthodox Mormons who would say that that goes against this temple recommend interview question, basically. I'm curious what you guys think, so leave a comment. Do you strive to keep the Sabbath day holy, both at home and at church, attend your meetings, prepare for and worthily partake of the sacrament, and live your life in harmony with the laws and commandments of the gospel? I've actually had a few people argue with me that you don't have to be like a regularly attending member to go to the temple, which is simply not true. In order to get a temple recommend, you have to answer this question, and if you answer honestly and you're not attending regularly, you're not going to get a temple recommend. Unless you get a bishop that is okay with bending the rules, which is another reason that it's hard to say you support all of the clergy when some bishops will let you into the temple even if you answer wrong on some of these questions. I mean, it's so varied. Do you strive to be honest in all that you do? I know a few Mormons who should definitely be answering no to this question, and they're still entering the temple on a regular basis. Are you a full tithe payer? Full tithe payer is 10% of your income. And again, I have heard of a lot of people just being dishonest and getting into the temple anyway on this one. But if you really believe the church is true, you probably also believe that you're going to be judged for that pretty harshly in the hereafter. There are also a lot of people who will argue with me on this one that you don't have to be a full tithe payer to go to the temple. You don't have to give 10%. It's not an entry fee. It's one of the temple recommend interview questions. If you go through the church's website, you look at all of the things that they've written about it, the things the prophets have said, the things the handbooks say, the temple recommend interview questions. If you look at the verbiage, it is always talked about as a requirement to go to the temple. Do you understand and obey the word of wisdom? This means that you're not drinking coffee or alcohol and that you're not smoking. Do you have any financial or other obligations to a former spouse or to children? If yes, are you current in meeting those obligations? Do you keep the covenants that you made in the temple, including wearing the temple garment as instructed in the endowment? This is another one that I've seen a lot of Mormons argue about recently, where they'll say, you don't actually have to wear your garments. Nobody really wears their garments. You don't have to. It's not a requirement. Yes, it absolutely is. It is. If you want to be a fully participating member of the Mormon church, you need to wear your garments day and night. It is one of the temple recommend interview questions. You could, of course, lie about it. But again, if you truly believe the church is true, then God will probably judge you for that once you're dead. Are there serious sins in your life that need to be resolved with priesthood authorities as part of your repentance? Do you consider yourself worthy to enter the Lord's house and participate in temple ordinances? So as you can see, there is quite a lot that goes into just being considered worthy or not to enter the temple. And I would say, especially for young people, there are some questions on there that I'm not sure that they would even really understand the gravity of. So I did my first temple recommend interview at 12 years old. And I didn't understand the gravity of these questions completely. And when they talked about keeping the law of chastity, I didn't even know what that meant. But I assumed that because I didn't know what it meant, I wasn't doing anything wrong. So I said, yeah, of course I'm keeping all of these laws. I don't know. I'm 12. Now that we have the temple recommend interview questions, let's fast forward to actually going to the temple. I don't remember specifically my first time going, but I do remember, you know, a multitude of times that I went as a young person. When you go to the temple as somebody between 12 and 18 years old, you're mostly going for baptisms for the dead and confirmations for the dead. Baptisms for the dead are something that the Mormon church does by proxy. So basically, somebody would be dressed all in white and go to a baptismal font in the temple and be baptized in the name of somebody who has died. If you want to know more of the details about that, I'll link this video in the description that my husband and I did about the plan of salvation, and we kind of go more in depth on why the church does these things. But basically, the church teaches that everybody should have the opportunity to be baptized, receive their endowments, and be sealed in the temple, even if they didn't have that opportunity when they were alive. So they do it for them after they are dead, and from the spirit world, they are able to either accept or reject those blessings. Here's a few things that I remember from being a kid and going and doing baptisms and confirmations for the dead. There's a lot of sitting and waiting that happens. You go to the temple, you go into the changing room, you get changed into an all-white jumpsuit. You're supposed to only wear white. You would sit in this little chapel and you watch everybody be baptized through the glass. And everybody gets baptized, I think like 10 to 15 times, and then their turn's over, they get out, and the next person goes in and gets baptized again for 10 to 15 more names. So in the chapel, you have to be quiet, so you can basically just sit and watch, or they have like scriptures, you can sit and read scriptures. Sometimes, depending on how big your ward is or how many kids showed up, it would take a long time. It could honestly be pretty boring. I was always on the lookout for like miraculous sorts of things, because when I would go to church and I would go to seminary, I would hear stories about like, oh, my second cousin once removed went to the temple and did baptisms for the dead, and every time she got baptized, she could see a figure of light appear and thank her for being baptized for that person. And so I'm always looking around like, I wonder if it's my time to see something miraculous happen. Something that I brought up in the first video I did about this was that as a teenage girl, I was always concerned about going and getting baptized and how, you know, my hair and makeup would be totally messed up. And there were so many people that basically said that I was really vain and such a horrible person for being concerned about that. I honestly feel like that's really sad, because I feel like it is reflective of the fact that the church doesn't want people to be selfish in any way. And what I mean by that is that sometimes it is okay to be selfish. It's okay to care about how you look. It's okay to care about yourself. And the church always wanted you to put everybody else before yourself. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing. Do not get me wrong here. I think that it's a wonderful thing, you know, to put your family first, to, you know, even put your religion first if that's your thing. But oftentimes in the church, it felt like I could not ever care about myself. I could not put myself first. And as an adult and after leaving the church, I've learned that a lot of times I do need to put myself first. I have 4 children and I always want to put my kids first. But I do realize on some level that if I always put everybody before myself, I run out of steam. I start trying to pour from an empty cup. And that ended up in my early 20s making me really, really depressed. And that is what I think about when I see people making comments about, oh, like you only cared about your hair and your makeup and your looks. You're so vain. I was a teenage girl and I did care a lot about my hair and makeup, especially because I was in a group of my peers. And I hated that. I didn't want to look crazy because usually after we went to the temple, we would go like get an ice cream or something. And I would feel really, really uncomfortable looking like a drowned rat right after going to the temple. So if you think that I'm a vain and terrible person for feeling that way as a teenager, okay, whatever. But that is the way I felt. After a few years of going and doing baptisms for the dead, I decided that I didn't really want to do those as often, and I usually would only go and do confirmations for the dead. Confirmation is just something that happens after the baptism where men will lay their hands on your head and give you the gift of the Holy Ghost. So for that one, obviously, you don't have to get wet. So I much preferred to just go do that. So let's shift gears to the first time I went through the temple as an adult. I would have been 19 years old when I was engaged to be married and went through the temple to do my endowment ceremony. And there is like a temple prep course that you can take at church to prepare you to enter the temple. And we did do that. It did not prepare me in the ways that I think it should have. I really did not know what I was getting into. So when I first got to the temple, the first time doing an endowment ceremony, this is where you will receive your new name and be anointed with oil, receive your garments and wear them for the first time. I remember being in this little room alone with this old lady. My most specific memory of this time, because mind you, this has been over 10 years ago now, but the thing I remember the most was being in this little like stall area and her telling me that I was going to receive my new name. I don't remember everything she said, but she gave me the impression that this was like my real name. This is the name that my Heavenly Father gave me, which made it feel very special to me. And I thought that this is going to be the name that I'm known as in the afterlife, basically. And she pulls up, she's got like a little whiteboard and a cloth covering it, and she uncovers it, and the name was Leah. And this is supposed to be very secretive, so like it'd be against all the rules for me to tell you my name. You're not supposed to tell anybody, but I don't believe anymore, obviously. But I remember seeing Leah, and she said Leah, and I felt at the time like that feels so right. I had no idea, and I had no way of knowing at the time that everybody who went to the temple that day got that same name. It still makes me kind of upset to think about. Everybody who goes to the temple on a certain day of the month receives the same name. So if you go and look at like the day you first went through the temple and did your endowment ceremony, you're able to look up what the name is. And so there are thousands and thousands of people whose new special name is the same. And I didn't know that. It was hurtful to learn it after the fact because I had felt like that was special to me and I was unique. But at the time, it felt right. I was really happy about it. I don't remember too much about being anointed with oil. I know that in the past, you were just covered in basically a sheet, but you were naked when they anointed you with oil, I believe on your head and your groin area. It's been so long, I honestly don't remember too much. I do remember putting on my garments for the first time and being like, I couldn't imagine having intimate time with my husband and being wearing that and having to like take that off as the final layer. It's not cute. Here's what the garments look like. Mine were a little bit different than this. The ones that I had were more like a spandex material, so they were tight to the skin rather than like a loose like this. But yeah, still didn't look great. And again, this is another thing that I brought up once I got like the temple clothes on and stuff, and once I got the garments on, I'm looking in the mirror being like, don't love this look for me. And people called me vain for that. I feel like I'm not alone in having these sorts of feelings. A lot of people thought that that was terrible of me to be concerned with the way that I looked. I think that part of this comes from not only the church like discouraging you to worry about yourself and telling you to put everybody else first and, you know, not have any sort of selfish anything in your life, but also from the fact that, you know, within the church, there are so many rules governing what you're allowed to wear, how you're allowed to dress, that Mormons often have a look to them, right? No tattoos, no piercings, no like extreme hairstyles, no extreme clothing. And then you have to cover a certain amount of skin, so everybody does that. And the result ends up being that a lot of Mormons look very similar. And this is even more of an extreme once you go through the temple, because everybody wears these clothes. Everybody looks like this. There's no variation in color. They discourage you from having like painted fingernails. They say if you're gonna wear jewelry, like just a little tiny bit, like really small studs, things like that. They don't want you to look different than other people. And I feel like all of this is like on purpose. They are having us all be the same. There's no individuality. There's no expressing yourself when you go through the temple. So anyway, I go through my initiatory, I get my clothes. They have, you know, all of the extra little accessories in a little bag, and I go out to meet my family to go into the endowment room. And see all my family members also wearing this exact same clothes. And I remember, you know, you're not really supposed to talk, so we were just kind of like quietly smiling at each other, and, you know, my mom and my grandma and everybody like, yeah, like encouragement, you know, and I'm just like, ooh, not loving this. They hadn't prepared me for this. We go into the endowment room. The men sit on one side and the women sit on the other. And so, you know, I sat across the aisle from my husband to be. The endowment session starts. At the time, it was very long. It was a very long session. And you go into this room, you're all dressed with your clothes and your little bag of accessories. They explain sort of what's gonna happen, and they play a movie. The endowment ceremony is a lot of watching a movie. And it's basically the story of Adam and Eve. And here's the thing, when you are preparing to go through the temple, they really hype it up, you know, like you are talking about going to the temple and getting married in the temple from the time you're a toddler. And it's, you know, I was expecting to be dazzled. I thought I was gonna learn some big new secrets, and, you know, there were so many things that were just gonna come together and make sense. And I certainly learned some secrets, but not the kind that I was expecting. Like, I thought I would get there and maybe, like, you know, I wasn't expecting to see God and Jesus in real life or anything like that. But I was expecting to learn something that would, you know, sort of make everything come together. And, you know, I already believed the church was true. I had a testimony. But I thought that there was like something that you get from going to the temple that would be new. And, you know, when they started playing the movie and stuff, I was like, okay. You know, the creation of the world, Adam and Eve, like, I know this stuff. We already know, you know, we know what happens to Adam and Eve. We know the story. You know, we know Lucifer comes. We know all of this stuff. And I waited the whole time as they're playing this movie for like the thing. And I wasn't learning anything new. This was stuff that we had been taught over and over and over. The only thing that was new was doing it in these Chef Boyardee outfits with a veil over my face. And so, you know, that's part of the ceremony, is there's a lot of like wardrobe changes going on. So, you know, you're gonna move the sash from this side to this side, and you're gonna put the veil up and put the veil down, and you're going to attach an apron to the front of you to represent the fig leaves that Adam and Eve wore in the garden. You're gonna switch the tie that holds the veil on from this side to this side, and like a lot of like, okay, stand up, sit down, wardrobe change. Okay, now we're gonna learn secret handshakes. And I remember them like explaining these different handshakes that are supposed to be, you know, the signs and tokens, and being like, one, this sounds like secret combinations, which I've been warned against. Two, this feels like secret handshakes to get into heaven, because that's what they are. I remember thinking specifically, there's this part of the ceremony where everybody is chanting, and you put your arms above your head like this, and you say, "Oh God, hear the words of my mouth." And you do that, I think 3 times. "Oh God, hear the words of my mouth." And you all do it. So everybody's doing it. It's this very monotone. Just imagine like 50 voices, "Oh God, hear the words of my mouth," together. And I remember at that moment, seeing what everybody was wearing, looking around, saying the words, doing this thing, having learned all of these like secret handshakes, and being like, it feels like I'm in a cult. And the second that those words went through my mind, I was like, I'm about to be struck dead. Like, I'm gonna be smitten. And I actually thinking like, nope, I didn't mean that. Don't smite me. Like, because we are in this ceremony that is built up to be incredibly sacred. You know, part of me thinking like, oh my gosh, like Satan just entered my brain for a second to try to convince me that my church isn't true in the middle of the most sacred ceremony. Like, how is Satan in the room with us? Sorry, that just made me laugh because I was like thinking that like joke, like, is Satan in the room with us now? But yeah, like it scared me thinking that, having that thought cross my mind, because I'd never, ever in my life ever considered that the church could possibly be a cult. Like that wasn't a thing for me. I wasn't one of those people that, you know, had doubts. That wasn't me. But the ceremony, the clothing, the rituals, the secret handshakes to get into heaven, that was a lot, and I wasn't prepared for any of it. And seeing my family all wearing these clothes and like smiling at me like, yes, this is good. I'm just being like, what? But fast forward, we, you know, go through the whole ceremony, and then you're gonna go through the veil, you know, the veil, basically just a, you know, big curtain. You're gonna do the secret handshakes through the veil. Your name is going to be called through the veil, and you're going to go into the celestial room, which is representative of the celestial kingdom. And at that point I was like, oh, like celestial room. Okay. Like that's where the secret is. That's, you know, it's supposed to be like the celestial kingdom. That's the highest level of heaven. Certainly, you know, we went through all of this, but we're going to get to the celestial room, and it's going to all come together. So I go to the veil, do the secret handshakes with my temple worker telling me what they are, because I absolutely could not remember what they were all called and, you know, how to do each of them. I get through the veil, and it's, you know, it's a room. It's all white. Everything is white and like creams and ivories. And, you know, it's beautiful in its own way. There's definitely something to be said about the decor. There was no big secret. There was nothing big and new and something that brought everything together. The best thing about it, and I think the thing that I, you know, as a Mormon came to that was like this is the whole point, was being in that room that was representative of the celestial kingdom, you know, despite the fact that it was just a room with, you know, really extravagant white decorations. Was that I was with my family. My grandparents were there, my mom and dad were there, my fiance was there. And, you know, the way that I kind of like compartmentalized all of this and brought it together in my own way was being like, okay, well, I didn't learn anything new other than secret handshakes. There's not, you know, a big special secret about, you know, the meaning of life or anything like that, but you get through life, you learn these secret handshakes, you die, and you get to go to heaven and be with your family. So that's, you know, in my mind, how I was like, this all, I guess, makes sense. Like I said before, because of the way everybody is dressed the same, and even the way that everybody receives the same name on any given day, even if we didn't know it, it really just feels like they are stripping away all of your individuality. You are in a room with a whole bunch of other people that are dressed exactly the same way that you are, and you are no longer the name that you were before you entered the temple. Now I'm Leah. And Leah is dressed like everybody else. And we are in heaven all looking the same. I tried really, really hard to not have any negative thoughts about it. So I didn't think too hard about it. And I didn't, you know, anything negative, I was like, nope, that's, you know, that's Satan. But now, with hindsight being 2020 looking back, it really was a big disappointment. I was hoping for so much more out of my temple experience than what I got. And if you would have asked me as a Mormon, I would have been like, oh, absolutely. Like, it was great. It's incredible. Like, I learned so much. I have such a strong testimony, and it's disingenuous. And I'm not saying that every Mormon who says like, oh, every time I go to the temple, I learn something new. I'm not saying that they're lying. What I am saying that is that you have built this experience up in your mind from the time that you were a child, or, if you were a convert, from the time that you started learning about it. Like, the temple is supposed to be so big and so important and so incredible. It's, the end goal, because if you can go through the temple worthily, you can go to the celestial kingdom worthily. And so I really feel like as Mormons, the temple is so sacred. We hear that word so often. It's sacred. It's so special that we can't even talk about it outside of this building because it is so sacred. And so, if we're questioned about it, because we've been told so many times how incredible and wonderful and beautiful and sacred it is, if we're questioned about it, we're not going to say anything except that it's incredible and beautiful and wonderful and sacred. Because to say anything else would be seen as ungrateful, vain. You didn't have a strong enough testimony. You were not ready. You didn't prepare well enough. Even though, I did everything I could. You cannot say these kinds of things to other Mormons because you will be looked down upon. So I didn't confide in anybody about it. And I just, went along with like, yes, like, this has been great. Very great. Very, incredible, amazing. Best experience of my life. When in reality, I did feel let down.
Hey guys, Lex from the future here, editing the video. I'm so sorry to do this to you guys, but I'm going to have to split this video into 2 parts. When I was filming it, originally it wasn't going to be a very long video, but then I ended up talking for over an hour. And as I'm going through editing it, trying to cut it down so it's a more reasonable length for a video, because this is not Mormon stories, I'm realizing that if I take too much out of it, I'm going to take away from things that I actually really did want to share. So I'm going to split it into 2 parts. Part 2 will be next week. I'm sorry about that. But I really want to be able to talk more about my experience going through the temple and getting married in the temple and getting sealed to my husband, as well as my experiences going through the temple with my in-laws and things like that happened later. So watch out for that next week. I'm going to end the video right here. And thank you guys for watching, and thank you for your patience.
I'd like to say a special thank you to my patrons for supporting the channel. You guys are the best. And extra special thank you to Craig Call, Doug Davis, Noble Monster Comics, Tans, and the Exmo Candle Co. for supporting at the Demon tier on my Patreon. You guys are awesome. I also wanted to shout out today's patron of the day, Brooke Davis. Brooke is an honorary Exmo who has been a patron for 13 months. Brooke, thank you so much for your support. If you guys would like to support the channel, there are links to do so in the description below, as well as links to all my other social media if you would like to see more content. Thank you for being here, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye!
Just trust that I'll keep it locked in a cell, never revealing no secret.